Ever get that itch to really understand how something works?
Hmm.
Especially those, older gadgets that have a certain mystique.
Oh, definitely.
Maybe you've seen some vintage tech making a comeback, or you're just fascinated by how things were uh, engineered back then.
Right. A different era of creation.
Well, today's deep dive cracks open exactly that kind of curiosity. We're looking at the 11 camera.
Yeah.
We've had listeners asking about these iconic, sometimes kind of quirky bits of tech and their stories.
Absolutely. And the material we've got is pretty fantastic. It's this Russian podcast script, just brimming with enthusiasm, a real love for retro photography, especially this camera.
Yeah, sounds great.
And it's not just specs. It's packed with humor, those little anecdotes that anyone who's fiddled with older gear will just instantly get.
Exactly. Forget dry manuals. This feels more like chatting with a friend who's genuinely excited, right? So our mission today is basically to distill the most interesting, informative bits about the L11 from this source. We want to give you a clear picture of what it's all about, its features, its character, its place in history, without, grounding you in details.
Kind of a shortcut.
Think of it as your fast track to being, well, pretty knowledgeable about this specific slice of the past. Okay, so where do we even begin with this beast?
Let's start with just the feel of it. The physicality of the weapon. What jumps out from the source first?
Without a doubt, it's the weight. Our source doesn't just say it's heavy. They say it's so heavy that you can simultaneously build biceps and take a masterpiece.
Yeah.
It's quite an image.
Yeah, it really is.
And there's this story about someone dropping it on their foot and being out of action for days.
Mm-hmm.
But the camera, totally unscathed. Sounds built like a tank.
It really does. It underscores a different time for manufacturing, doesn't it? This
Yeah.
focus on just sheer robustness, something you often don't see now.
True.
The source even jokes it could double as a self-defense tool, throw it at someone for a guaranteed bump.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe like a surprisingly well-framed portrait mid-tumble.
Okay. So how do you actually attach a lens to this tank? It uses an M42 lens mount. Now, for people maybe not deep into vintage cameras, why is that significant?
Well, the M42 mount is actually pretty important historically. It's a universality. It was a standard screw-in type mount used by like a whole range of camera makers, different brands, different generations.
All right.
Which meant you had this flexibility that wasn't always common. As the source humorously notes, you could, theoretically screw on a lens from your grandfather's Praktica and just start shooting with the other.
So cross-brand compatibility, which was rare then.
Exactly. A rare thing when makers usually locked you into their own systems.
With the caveat, they add, that you might end up complaining that everything is out of focus because your eyes aren't what they used to be. So the past might fit, but maybe your eyesight doesn't.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there's always that.
Now, the Adela Gzellev often came with a specific lens, didn't it? The Ala-4 Aura 4 gets a lot of attention for its swirly bokeh effect.
Yes, the oviforphoria, it's really famous for that distinctive swirling pattern in the out-of-focus bits of a photo.
Mm-hmm.
The source has this funny, almost tongue-in-cheek explanation. Suggests some people think it's magic. But in reality, it's just shaky hands and everything swirls.
Okay, so not actually shaky hands.
No. The truth is, it's down to the specific optical design, the aberrations of the lens itself. But it's a look, a characteristic that people actually seek out now for its unique aesthetic.
Right, a unique visual signature. So how do you actually take a picture with this camera? It's described as completely manual. What does that mean for someone picking it up today?
Fully manual means, well, you control everything. The aperture, that's the opening in the lens, controlling light, the shutter speed, how long the film's exposed, and of course, the focus.
Okay, all you.
Yeah. And the L11 also has this external light meter, selenium-based, with a little needle. What's interesting is this type doesn't need batteries. It generates its own power from light. However...
There's always a however with vintage tech, isn't there?
Pretty much.
As the source points out, kind of laughing, this light meter lives its own life. There's this image of trying to shoot a wedding while the meter has apparently decided to go on vacation.
Right, so you might be left just guessing the exposure or using that old Sunny 16 rule.
So ingenious for its time, being battery-free, but maybe temperamental.
Exactly. Known for its variability. It reflected the limits of the tech back then and really demanded a more, intuitive feel for exposure from the photographer.
But there's help, right, an exposure calculator dial.
Yes, there is. To aid with this, there's a calculator dial on the camera body. The source describes using it, twisting the dial, lining up the needle, trying to read the sunlight. It makes you feel like Harry Potter.
Huh? waving a wand.
Except the only spell you're casting is work, please. It really highlights that more deliberate, involved process compared to the point-and-shoot automation we expect now.
Okay, so once you've hopefully figured out the settings, next step is loading the film. And that's described as a Quest 80 Fellabilla, which sounds like a serious undertaking.
The source definitely paints it as more complex than just dropping a cartridge in.
Yeah. There's a particularly funny anecdote about a friend spending like 2 hours wrestling with what he thought was the camera, only to realize he was actually trying to pry open the refrigerator door.
Oh, no. The perils of unfamiliar tech, right.
No.
And what happens if you don't successfully complete this Quest 80 Feval? What's the penalty?
Well, the source humorously warns that loading it wrong can mean a whole roll of just black frames after developing. Compares it to Malevich's Black Square, except instead of art, you just get disappointment.
Yeah.
And wasted film, definitely not the goal.
Right. No auction-worthy results there. Now, what about seeing what you're aiming at? The viewfinder. It's mentioned as having 65% frame coverage. What does that mean, practically?
That means the viewfinder only shows you roughly 2/3 of the actual area that ends up on the final photo.
So what you see isn't quite what you get. Not entirely. The source uses this funny example. You think you framed this perfect landscape, but later you find out your neighbor, in their underwear, has wandered into the edge of the frame.
Oh, dear. Unexpected extras.
Exactly. The life hack offered is just tell everyone to step back further. To avoid those surprises creeping in, it requires a bit of guesswork, anticipating what might enter the edges.
Good to know. A wider field of surprise, maybe. Now, another characteristic, or maybe lack of subtlety, is the sound the shutter makes.
Oh, yeah. The source does not mince words here. Describes the shutter sound as audible from 3 blocks away.
Serious.
Compares it to a starting pistol. Or maybe a church bell on Easter. There's even a story about someone getting banned from a kids' event because the camera was just too loud, too disruptive.
Wow. So, maybe not the best choice for stealth photography.
Probably not your first pick, no. It definitely makes its presence known.
Okay, let's touch on reliability. Or perhaps the lack thereof.
The source tackles this with a really good dose of humor. It mentions potential malfunctions, with the shutter, the light meter, that plastic winding lever.
The usual suspects for old gear, maybe?
Pretty much. And the solutions offered are just as amusing. If the shutter jams, just pump up your finger on the winding lever with extra enthusiasm.
Right, just force it.
If the light meter gives up, well, that's just par for the course, isn't it? And if the plastic lever breaks, just yell, "Well, not again," and keep shooting. Like a true Soviet photographer with resilience.
It really paints a picture of a camera that might need some persuasion sometimes. A very hands-on relationship.
Definitely suggests that, yeah. Maybe slightly exasperated at times. There's even a mention of a friend who apparently fixes Turkim with just a toothpick and chewing gum.
Seriously. MacGyver style.
Apparently enough to get you through the next roll of film.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Which leads us pretty naturally to the actual technical specs. While the stories are great, it's good to have the core details too.
Absolutely. Good anchor point.
Okay. So it uses standard 35mm film, also known as Type 135. Pretty common.
Yep.
It features a cloth, horizontal travel shutter. Speeds range from B-bulb mode for long exposures right up to 1/1500th of a second.
Decent range for the time.
We've already talked about the Pentaprism viewfinder with its limited 65% coverage.
Right. The surprise zone.
It also has a manual frame counter, which, as the source cheekily points out, you might forget to reset or accidentally reset, leading to some unexpected frame numbering.
Yeah. Keeping track yourself.
And finally, the weight again comes in at a substantial 900 to 1,000 grams, almost a full kilogram of solid. A show is the word they use. Iron.
Yes, solid iron. A kilo of camera. You feel it.
And these specs, they all contribute to how you use the camera, and the source really brings that to life with some memorable real-life stories.
Oh, yeah. The anecdotes really paint a vivid picture of what it was actually like using a lemon eyes out in the world.
There's the story of Sonia trying to shoot a kindergarten event. Apparently involved 2 hours of setup, 3 rolls of film, and the result was mostly black frames. But, remarkably, the camera itself survived the whole ordeal.
Tough camera. Maybe not the most reliable outcome, though. And then there's the wedding story.
Right, yes, the wedding.
The shutter fired, but the mirror inside got stuck up. And the entire wedding party just had to wait patiently while Sonia manually tried to coax it back down.
Oh, wow. Talk about pausing the ceremony.
The source jokes that that moment became more memorable for everyone than the actual vows. It just underscores the potential for things to go unexpectedly and maybe add to the occasion in its own weird way.
Potentially adds an element of unpredictable drama.
Yeah.
And to help navigate these potential issues, the source gives some tips and tricks, again, with that characteristic humor.
Right. One bit of advice. Always bring an optimistic friend. Apparently, moral support is crucial when shooting with 11.
I can believe that.
And also, maybe pack a couple of screwdrivers, just in case.
Practical and emotional support needed.
Exactly. And then there's the rather unconventional test for the shutter. Point it directly at the sun if it starts emitting smoke. Congratulations. You now have a rather industrial-looking desk lamp.
Well, that's certainly one way to repurpose it if things go south. So as we bring our deep dive into the N11 towards a close, what would you say are the key takeaways, the essence of this camera?
I think the A11 really embodies this fascinating mix. It's got that rugged, almost agricultural build quality.
Yeah, the tank aspects.
Coupled with a completely manual, often quite idiosyncratic way of operating. It demands a very hands-on, very thoughtful approach to photography. And as our source hilariously shows, it often comes with its own unique challenges and sometimes surprisingly memorable moments.
It really does offer a window into a very different era of photography, doesn't it? Just worlds away from the instant feedback and like total automation we're used to now with digital.
Absolutely.
Understanding a camera like this gives you, I think, valuable context for the history of image making, the evolution of technology.
Totally agree. And it prompts an interesting thought, maybe for you listening. In a world that's always pushing for more advanced, more automated tech, what is the inherent value, the unique appeal of devices that demand a more manual, imperfect, maybe even humorous user experience?
Good question.
What do we gain, and perhaps what do we subtly lose in that constant trade-off between ultimate convenience and a more tactile, more engaged way of creating or interacting? Something to mull over, maybe, long after this deep dive ends.